Vi ser herud over Kallebod Strand, farvandet mellem Sjælland og Amager. Her udføres for tiden et storstilet ingeniørarbejde. Sådan så her ud i 1938. Og sådan vil der komme til at se ud i 1943, når det største inddæmningsarbejde i Danmark er gennemført. Amager er blevet en tredjedel større.
When thinking of land reclamation projects, the Netherlands is probably the first country that comes to mind. But it's certainly not the only country that partook in land reclamation projects in the 1900s. If you didn't catch it in that opening segment, or from the title, today we'll be taking a look at a pretty niche topic, namely how Denmark reclaimed the western half of the island of Amager, which is the island right here by Copenhagen, the capital and largest city of Denmark. We'll also be covering why the reclaimed land is for the most part completely empty and not really being used for anything in particular. It definitely wasn't a project on the same scale as the massive polders in the Netherlands, but it is one that not a whole lot of people know about even in Denmark. And it's also a bit of an odd project, seeing as the land has for the most part not been developed and isn't even being used for agriculture like the Dutch polders. So with that said, let's talk about the history of land reclamation in and around Copenhagen. Without any land reclamation projects, the area in and around Copenhagen would look roughly like this. Parts of modern urbanized Copenhagen, along with some of what is today called Amagerfællet, were already drained during the Middle Ages, likely to protect the city from floods during storms and high tides. There was also a major protective dike further south to protect parts of the island that were naturally just barely above sea level. These western parts of Amager were generally used by peasants for their livestock to graze, but in the middle of the 1800s, Amagerfællet and the western coast came under military jurisdiction and was used for military exercises and as a part of Copenhagen's defenses in the case of an attack on the city. This is what initially sparked interest in draining the area in between Sjælland and Amager, as it would both be an opportunity to give the military more land to do exercises on, and to give the peasants more land for their livestock to graze. It would also be a perfect opportunity to take a deeper, more direct channel on the shallow seafloor for larger ships to pass through when sailing to Copenhagen's southern harbor. In the early 1900s, various plans were considered, including one where they'd potentially dig a canal through the entire island of Amager, and with a bridge over the Øresund to Sweden. But that would prove to be overly optimistic, as a channel was never dug, and the bridge wouldn't be built before the 1990s. Despite plans being considered this early on, nothing would come to fruition before 1939, when a law regarding the draining of the area was passed in order to create jobs for the growing unemployed population in Copenhagen. Their work would then begin in 1940 during the German occupation, in part to avoid the unemployed population being sent to Germany to do forced labor. The reclaiming of the land would consist of three major steps. First, the digging of a channel on the seafloor for ships to pass through, and the simultaneous creation of a dike with the soil from the seafloor. Then after that, in a specific section where the soil was particularly tough, the area was surrounded by piles of soil and drained so the channel could be dug with better digging equipment such as regular excavators. By 1943, the channel on the seafloor for shipping and the dike would be finished, resulting in the area becoming a large lake. And the final step would simply be draining this new lake into the ocean, a process which took a couple of months. The old Amagerfællet, which used to belong to the military, became open to the public, while the military took over the newly drained area now called Kalvebodfællet, with the only exception being the southwestern portion, which became a nature reserve. Since the draining of Kalvebodfællet in the 1940s till today, there have been several other large and small land reclamation projects, such as Avedøre Holme, which was drained to make room for a large industrial zone. This land over here, which was drained to make room for the airport and a tunnel over to Sweden, Peberholm, a small island where the tunnel to Sweden emerges and continues as a bridge, as well as several peninsulas off the coast of Copenhagen, mainly for industry and to expand the harbor, with the largest of these developments being Nordhavn, a peninsula that is still growing and being developed and should be home to a whole 40,000 people when all the construction is finished. But even with all these land reclamation projects after the draining of Kalvebodfællet in the 40s, Kalvebodfællet has till this day remained mostly empty and undeveloped. This of course raises the question, why in the world did they drain all this land for it not even to be used? Well, part of the answer you already know. It was drained to create jobs, not necessarily to expand Copenhagen, but the main reason is that it was simply not possible or safe to develop the land until very recently. As mentioned, the military used Kalvebodfjeldet for military exercises, and they would do so until 1984 when they handed it over to the Ministry of the Environment, which partially opened it to the public. But access to parts of Kalvebodfjeldet were still restricted as there were unexploded grenades, explosives, and ammunition from the many exercises there while it was drained, but also from the centuries of naval exercises before that. Despite the area being somewhat restricted, the military giving it up did allow for some development of the area, such as a bridge and highway from Sjælland across Amager and over to the Øresund tunnel and bridge that passes over to Sweden. A metro line along with the Ørestad district was also planned in the early 90s, with the first buildings seeing their completion in the early to mid 2000s, making this barely inhabited region with only 100 people a fairly busy part of Copenhagen with a population of around 16,000 today. It would take until 2010 before the last explosives were finally removed by the Danish military, finally making Kalvebodfjeldet open to the public completely, with the exception of the nature reserve in the southwest. So, to answer the original question, the reason the drained land near Copenhagen is empty today is that large parts of it simply couldn't be developed before 2010. But with the aforementioned Ørestad project being just about finished, we will more than likely see Copenhagen expand into the large empty area, especially with how ridiculously expensive housing has become in Copenhagen in recent decades. It's also very possible that large parts of the land will be left to nature as parks that can't be used for recreational purposes. Only time and the political tides will really tell. But that's about all for now. See you guys in my next video.